Welcome back to all our EFAF and EFAI students. I wanted to just send out my sincerest apologies about my awful connectivity today. It has been an upward battle for a couple of days. It's caused me quite a lot of grief, but I think it's safe to say that the technological connectivity gremlin won the battle today, and I definitely lost the battle. But please know that next week I am hoping that I will be able to get back on campus and use the Wi-Fi connection there. So hopefully this will be an isolated incident and not a recurring issue. At this point, I just wanted to thank my colleagues for stepping in. We have a wonderful team, and we are a wonderful team, and I'm sure that many of you picked up on that. So I do hope that the discussion that was facilitated really helps you to reflect on the poem as a whole, and hopefully we can transfer some of those discussions online. And in the session, I am going to try guide some of your thought processes, and there will be opportunities for you to engage with these ideas and these guided questions online. Please utilize these online activity spaces. They really are designed to help you to practice the various assessment standards, and for you to then reflect on the learning outcomes. Are you able to achieve specific tasks? You should be able to answer yes or no, and then based on this, you need to then think about, well, how best can I improve? Obviously, if you work through the material and the activities and resources that we will be uploading on the page, you will find that you will develop various skills in a stepwise manner, and you should feel more confident to respond to specific questions and to just develop an informed opinion around specific things. So we do really encourage you to utilize the space. Everything in this course is designed to help you to practice the assessment standards. So when the main exam comes, where the majority of your overall mark will come from, you will already have developed these skill sets that you can then just apply to the examination. So please keep coming back to this, keep reminding yourself to constantly work through the module holistically, to complete these activities. You will then find that when the exam comes, your stress with regards to learning will be much reduced because you would have already developed quite a few skills. So in the session today, we are going to be looking at the poem Sometimes When It Rains, and I do just want to start the session by quickly reflecting on some of the points that some of you brought up in the live learning event. Before we start the poem, I did just want to pick up on some of the discussions that were brought up in the live learning event around exploring our prior knowledge. So I posted quite a few of these open-ended questions, and I just wanted to explain to you why I posted these questions and to just encourage further reflection on these ideas. So firstly, the first open-ended question I have was, how do you think poetry should be used in the language classroom? And please bear in mind that this question was quite a trick question because there's no right or wrong response. How poetry should be used is obviously dependent upon the lesson that you are teaching. What is the theme, or what is the focus of the lesson, and how does a poem then come into that lesson? How can a poem be integrated in a lesson? Also, why this is a trick question is that sometimes the poem can be the lesson. I think many of you in our discussion noted that poetry develops figurative language, it develops grammatical skills, it develops sentence construction, spelling, vocabulary. all of you highlighted these skills that a poem develops when one reads through a poem, or you as a teacher will have shared reading of a poem. But that can actually be the entire lesson, because of all these skills and language skills that a poem can develop. The poem can be the lesson. So I want you to also think about that. How can a poem be the sole focus of a lesson? And it's obviously can be used as a comprehension. There was even a response saying that it can be used as listening skills. So there's various things and various holistic skills that the poem can develop, and it can be this very exciting and very rich platform to have a great lesson around various different language related skills. And then furthermore, I also asked, do you think children develop their language through poetry? What is the best time to use poetry in the classroom? Explain your response. And how can poetry link to incidental learning? And I think you had a really good discussion around these points, particularly the, do you think children develop their language through poetry? I think we did identify various different skills that naturally develop. But I also want you to think of the third question. When is the best time to use poetry in the language lesson? And this was also a trick question, because there is no best time. There is only the right time for your lesson. It depends on what your lesson is focusing on. For some of us, perhaps we might use poetry as an introduction to a lesson. We might use it for students to identify specific poetic devices, language devices, even punctuation, language use, whatever it might be. Various language skills can develop. But once again, coming back to this idea that the poem can also be the entire focus of a lesson. There is a lot that can be explored and a lot of skills that can be developed through using a poem as the primary resource. So I want you to consider that. Think about that. Obviously, it depends on the poem that you select, and it's very important for you to select poems that are meaningful and relevant to the South African environment. And this is particularly why we selected the poem Sometimes When It Rains, as it really explains a South African environment, and it explains the South African lived experience. We really get a sense that, was this the poet's childhood experiences, and how, as much as there are definite beautiful moments, rain is described as something to be celebrated, there are other times when rain is described and defined as something that's perhaps very dangerous. And it's all dependent on the poet's experiences as she grows up, as she develops, and as she learns about the world around her. A really deep and meaningful poem, and there's a lot to discuss. We are obviously just going to skim the surface, but our hope is that in future live learning events, we can unpack this poem a little bit further, and hopefully this poem can be a starting point for you to read through a wide variety of poems. Obviously, this is quite a detailed and quite an in-depth poem, but even consider, would you as a language teacher maybe perhaps use excerpts of it, use parts of the poem in a particular lesson? Think about something like that. And then I also asked that final question, and it was quite a sort of high-ordered question about how does poetry link to incidental learning? And I provided you with the definition of incidental learning, saying it's that accidental learning. It's that learning that is unintentional, the learning that it might not be the sole kind of focus or goal, but it is something that is developed in the background. And poetry can be a wonderful space for this too. So in exploring a poem, we are obviously exploring various emotions. And I think that we see that quite strongly in the poem Sometimes When It Rains, that there is a variety of emotions and various emotions that link to rain, depending on what the narrator and poet is focusing on at the time. When she is thinking back to her childhood, the rain is seen as something to be celebrated, but perhaps other elements of her childhood, perhaps the rain can be seen as something that's very dangerous, something that highlights her harsh reality or harsh environmental experiences and her environmental upbringing. All of these things, there's so much to discuss in the poem, and I think every time you read through the poem, you'll pick up a little bit more. So I do encourage you to really, read through this poem, watch the recording, the live video recording of Nina Mhlophe reading through the poem. She's a wonderful performance poet, and I think the story of the poem and the tone and the emotions comes through really wonderfully in that performance from Poetry Africa. So I encourage you, watch this a few times, take down notes on the poem, and then go look at the guided questions and then think how you would respond to those questions. So for this part of this recording, I am going to be speaking you through some of the guided questions that I was hoping to cover in the session today. And I'm going to really keep it very open, so to just prompt your thoughts. And then it's very important that you go download the worksheet and take down your own notes. Really, why we do quite a few worksheets is because we are encouraging you to practice or model the skills that we will be requiring of you in various tests, assessments, or even the end-year exam. So it's very important that you work consistently through these activities, through these resources, and we will always encourage you to practice. As the age-old saying goes, practice makes perfect. And I know nobody is perfect. Our language can never be perfect, but we can work at steadily improving it. So please be open to these online resources, complete the online resources. And then there's also a platform or a space for us to provide you with meaningful feedback. So we can always then help you to improve your language by giving feedback. The only way we're going to make this meaningful is if you practice the activities and then you work through the activities, well, we work through the activities together. So please complete these activities and allow this recording to just prompt specific thoughts, and then you can then go to the worksheet and complete the worksheet. We will be posting some forum spaces for you to share your responses, and we will likely be encouraging further sharing of responses in next week's live learning event. So please come to that live learning event prepared, take down as many notes as possible, and we are going to then facilitate a discussion around this poem. So first question that I posed was, choose 3 adjectives to describe the child in stanza 1. And then as a little prompt, I provided here that a stanza refers to a paragraph. It's like a paragraph in a poem. So whenever we see the word stanza, we always know that it refers to the paragraphs. We're looking at the first 4 lines of the poem. Okay, and the first 4 lines of the poem go like this. It says, sometimes when it rains, I smile to myself and think of times when as a child I'd sit by myself and wonder why people need clothes. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So obviously this communicates that the poet is thinking back to her childhood, but what adjectives would you use to describe the child? So it's her inner child, her inner childhood. What adjectives would you use to describe the child? What we are requiring you to do here is to read between the lines. So it doesn't actually say anything about what her childhood was like, what personality traits she had as a child, but we are reading between the lines. And what I loved so much about this poem is that this child, her inner child, her childhood, is very reminiscent of the ultimate safari. There's this, sense of innocence in the child. Okay, so respond to that. Go to the worksheet and respond to this. Question 2 in your guided questions requires you to reflect on stanza 3 of the poem. So once again, you need to read between the lines to see what is being communicated about the narrator's childhood and childhood upbringing. What is communicated about where this child grew up? So the stanza goes, sometimes when it rains, I think of times when I watched goats running so fast from the rain, while sheep seemed to enjoy it. Okay, reflect on that, think about it, go to your Word document, take down notes. So question 3 requires you to compare and contrast various stanzas. So here you're looking at what's different in the stanzas, what might have changed. Once again, very important to realize that the narrator and poet, if the two can be separated, that's another question, but you need to reflect on what is the poet communicating? What is the poet telling you about her personal story and her growth and changes? Think about that. So we have already read through stanza 3 in the previous slide, so I'm going to read through stanzas 4 and 5. As I'm reading through it, obviously take down notes about what is being communicated. So stanza 4 goes, sometimes when it rains, I think of times when we had to undress, carry the small bundles of uniforms and books on our heads, and cross the river after school. Okay, what's being conveyed in this particular stanza? Then stanza 5, it says, sometimes when it rains, I remember times when it would rain hard for hours and fill our drum, so we didn't have to fetch water from the river for a day or two. Okay, think about what is the emotion, what is the tone that's being described, what experience is being described. Okay, take down notes around that. And also come back to, once again, what does this reveal about the narrator's or poet's childhood experiences? Okay, also very important to consider that the poet / narrator is reflecting back on her life. So she is thinking back to childhood times. We often remember parts of our childhood very differently when we are an adult reflecting backward. Okay, so let that also guide your responses a little bit. So this next question requires you to compare and contrast the tone or emotion that is described in various stanzas. Very important for you to think about where is this poet reflecting backward? Is she thinking of the child? Is she considering her childish mind, her childlike mind when she was a child? Or is she now an adult who's perhaps more aware of what's going on around her? Think about these things. So I've read through all of the stanzas. The only stanza I haven't read through yet is stanzas 6 and 7. So go back to your notes in the previous stanzas, look at what you've done, and then obviously compare it to stanzas 6 and 7, which I'm now going to read through. So stanza 6 goes, sometimes when it rains for many hours without break, I think of people who have nowhere to go, no home of their own, and no food to eat, only rainwater to drink. And then stanza 7 goes, sometimes when it rains for days without break, I think of mothers who give birth in squatter camps under plastic shelters at the mercy of cold, angry winds. And also while you are looking at stanzas 6 and 7, I want you to also think about the poetic devices that are used, particularly in stanza 7 when it talks about cold, angry winds. Okay, one needs to think, can winds be angry? What poetic device or feature does this refer to? Okay, just a little helpful hint. But with this, take down as many notes as possible. Once again, support and substantiate, draw on lines from the poem that really supports the argument or standpoint that you are making. Think about how the poet has phrased or framed her responses. Think, is she thinking back? Is she thinking now? Because if she's thinking back, obviously it's a childlike sort of mindset. She's thinking now, she's thinking as an adult who's perhaps more experienced and aware. Guided question 5 requires you to explore stanzas 9 and 10, and it's important that you compare and contrast how rain is described, the qualities that are given to rain that are perhaps different from previous stanzas. However, you might find that the tone or emotion or quality is perhaps linking to previous stanzas. So I really want you to critically explore this. Whenever we talk about critically exploring, we focus on 2 different parts of the argument. So I want you to think about how is it different, how is it similar or the same. And once again, describe why you say this. Why do you say it's similar? Why do you say it's different? Okay, so stanza 9 goes, sometimes when it rains so hard, hail joins in. I think of prisoners in all the jails of the world and wonder if they still love to see the rainbow at the end of the rain. Okay, so I think as I read it, we can already see how the tone and the feel has shifted and changed. What does the rain thus represent to a prisoner? Then, final stanza. Sometimes when it rains, with hailstones biting the grass, I can't help thinking they look like teeth, many teeth of smiling friends. Then I wish that everyone else had something to smile about. Also, as I read through that, I'm sure you felt a shift in tone. How the tone is shifted is based on the words that the poet uses. So I want you to think about what are the qualities, how is the rain described, what does the rain represent in these 2 different stanzas, how is it different from previous stanzas. Take down notes. So this question requires you to explore the sort of mixed emotions and feelings of the poem. There's definitely happy feelings and emotions expressed in the poem at specific parts. Then there are perhaps more serious, concerning or sad undertones at other stanzas. I want you to think about how is this used, and it's always very important when you are looking at a poem. So your first kind of response after you've read through a poem should be, how does this poem make me feel? And generally there can be 2 feelings around this. Generally it's either this poem makes me feel happy or sad. This is obviously an oversimplification, but what we see here in this poem is that it's difficult to kind of pinpoint an emotion because there's various different emotional expressions from this narrator, and the range, the quality of the rain and the understanding and interpretation of what the rain represents changes in different stanzas. So consider each one and discuss this sort of mixed emotions in this poem. The poem has sad, serious elements, but then the poem also has really happy, celebratory elements. So consider both of those and consider how the poet uses this to tell her story, to convey her story. And as we've already said, this is a very sort of South African story, and perhaps a lot of the thoughts and experiences this poet and narrator had it might resonate with you, it might not resonate with you, or some elements might speak to you and some elements maybe don't speak to you. But very important that we explore the various emotions and feelings of this poem. So this next question is an extension question. So it's higher ordered application type question, but you will notice that a lot of the notes that you made in the initial guided questions should really help you with responding to this. And this really could be like an essay type question because there is a lot obviously to say. But let me speak you through how you would start by responding to a question like this. So always in a kind of examination or test conditions, there will be an overarching general kind of question, very general sort of feedback, and then there will be more specific guidelines or feedback responses. So let me take you through this. So this question starts by stating, consider how all the elements of the poem contributes to the overall story or moral message. Your response should also consider why you believe Mhlophe wrote this poem. Explain what you believe her overall message or agenda was. Okay, so this is high order analysis. You really are looking at the poem holistically, looking at all the different elements, the language of the poem, the visual elements of the poem, the descriptions that are used in the poem, the tone of the poem. So all those notes that you made in the first guiding questions should really help you with responding to this. But that's a general sort of feedback. Then beneath that is specific guidance. So it's saying, yes, you must respond to these questions, but it's very important for you to focus on these core elements. So responding to each one of these sort of topic or focal points will really help you to responding to that general overview question. So it says how you would respond to it. You need to look at the language, consider how she describes experiences and issues. Very important for you to think about the descriptions that she uses, and also be very mindful that we are not requiring you to identify poetic features. So it's not necessarily sufficient to just say, here's a simile, here's a metaphor. You need to look at a deeper meaning. Okay, maybe she has described the rain in a specific way. She's described it as something, and this then maybe changes the feeling or quality of the rain, but you need to look at what she is comparing and how she is describing the rain. Then it's important for you to use imagery in the poem. What images does she use? She paints a kind of picture, and in the previous guided questions, actually in reading between the lines, she's really conveying a host of information about her childhood. She's really communicating something, but it's very important for us to pay attention and read between the lines. Then you must focus on the exploration of South African issues. Then very important for you to also describe the use of poetic devices to communicate various emotions and feelings. So coming back to these points, go back to the notes that you made and think about where would you begin by responding. If this was, let's just say, a question in an exam paper, how would you begin to describe this? How would you begin to tackle this question? Very important for you to start with, looking at various stanzas. So what we've done in these guided questions is that we've basically taken you to step one. We've taken you through the various steps, building you up so you have various notes and feedback and kind of responses and analysis type responses that you would then very easily be able to have a foundation. You have that foundation to now tackle this sort of essay type question. So be open-minded to this process. I know some of you might struggle with expressing some of your thoughts and ideas. We would not necessarily do something this higher ordered, but it's very important for you to practice the skill. And you might be pleasantly surprised. You might look at what you've already done and feel, actually, I'm quite confident to respond to this higher order question. Maybe you aren't, but it's important to try and attempt it so that we can then guide you and facilitate your language development, and particularly your confidence, because we do truly believe that you have to believe in yourself, you have to put in the work. And if you put in the work, if you believe in yourself, believe in your work ethic, then you should definitely be able to succeed in this module. So good luck with this worksheet activity, and we look forward to reading through your responses and hearing your responses, hopefully in a live learning event. Thank you so much.